Welcome to Stand in the Gap Today with your host, the Honorable Sam Rohrer, President of the American Pastors Network, addressing the most pressing issues impacting our economy, our homes, our churches, our culture, and our daily lives from a biblical and constitutional perspective. Stand in the Gap Today, transforming the culture one heart at a time.
Well, hello and welcome to this Friday edition. Already, what a fast week it's been here at Stand in the Gap Today. Frequently on this Friday program, if you listen regularly, and most of you do, Isaac Crockett generally leads, and then he asks me questions in our Ask Sam focus. But today, however, I'm going to introduce in just a few moments a new guest to Stand in the Gap Today. But it is in response to questions that I've received from many of you. So today I'm going to be asking questions that you've asked of me, but I'm going to ask them to my guest. Now, if you're totally confused by what I just said, bear with me. It'll make sense as we get going into the program today. But if you listen to this program regularly, you know that in the course of a month, we routinely visit certain issues that are biblically and prophetically and important and tie them in directly with headline news that we find in the day. So we try to be current on this program. For instance, every other Wednesday, we deal with the issue of prophecy and Israel. And my normal guests are Pastor Carl Broggi, Senior Pastor of Community Bible Church, Beaufort, South Carolina, and Bill Solis, who is the president and founder of Prophecy Depot Ministries. Once a month, we do a Culture and Values update with Dr. George Barna. Once a month, we focus on health issues and health freedom, specifically with Twyla Braze. And like yesterday, on the issue of apologetics and creation, we will deal with something. Yesterday, it happens to be with what's the Bible say about exploring space. And we had, as my guest, Rob Webb from Answers in Genesis. Now, once a month, I deal intentionally also with matters of national security as they relate to our freedom and to prophecy. And special guest is Navy SEAL instructor J.R. McGee. Every other Thursday, we select as well some issue of the day that comes from generally a judicial or legal issue, and we concentrate and we go to the Constitution and share some aspect of constitutional history with constitutional attorney David New. Now, as I have asked some of you who have communicated regularly and are devout listeners to this program about what area you would like to see addressed that we do not deal with regularly, it's come back quite regularly. We would love to see something on biblical stewardship, economics, money, and finances. Now, in the past, you know that I've dealt heavily on this issue and regularly, but it's a difficult thing to find someone who is well-versed on the policy issues of the day, also knowledgeable of biblical principles. So today, I'm going to introduce a new guest, and he and I have talked, and I'm glad that he's with me. So that being said, I've asked Rusty Leonard. He's the founder and CEO of Stewardship Partners Investment Counsel. He's the author of Stewardship Partners Economic and Market Update. He's my guest today, and he's graciously accepted to be a part. And today, I've entitled this focus on a broader aspect of finances and economics, more on the economics. The title is The U.S. Economy in Light of Debt, Dollar, Banks, and Credit Ratings. So with that, I welcome into the program right now Rusty Leonard. Rusty, thank you so much for being with me and our audience today.
Well, it's a pleasure, a great pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to it. We should have some fun today.
Well, I think so. So let's go back and forth on this, Rusty, because you have been in this space for a long time, and people are going to become aware of that. But let me get right into it so people have an understanding of who you are. Now, you're located geographically here in southeast Pennsylvania, where I am, but you began Stewardship Partners Investment Counsel, Inc., I think it's your full name. Explain that a little bit. When did you found this entity, and for what reason?
So I was one of the top portfolio managers at the Templeton Group of Funds back in the 90s. And on the first day of 2000, I left Templeton, and I formed Stewardship Partners, which was I felt called to do that. And I was also kind of prepared because I was known as the Christian guy at Templeton, so I got all the Christian accounts. And so I was familiar with screening their portfolios, and I thought I could do it better than what we were doing at Templeton. So I left Templeton, formed Stewardship Partners so that we could invest money from a Christian worldview perspective, screening out those companies that we really didn't think the Lord would want us to have anything to do with. And then there was a third component that we had a ministry that we started sometime earlier called Ministry Watch, which is meant to help Christians donate money more wisely to the various ministries that they are considering giving to. So our hope is that we make you more money at Stewardship Partners, do so in a way that honors the Lord through our biblically responsible investing approach, and then help you give that money away if you have excess to bless the kingdom and bless the Lord.
And Rusty, that's perfect. Now, my background, your background's in finance. My background has been more in the legislature for 20 years of my life, and then in business prior to that. And in every case, I have found when a believer's involved in some area, if they're really a believer dedicated to Scripture, they will have specific guidelines that they will be able to quickly identify as relates to their duty before God and duty before their customers, or in my case, in when I was in office, to the voter. I'm going to ask you that question right now. You said you left Templeton because you thought you could do a better job. Let me just ask you, as a Christian in finance and investment, you talk about biblical stewardship, you teach about it. What would you say is your primary obligation as you view it before God, and what is your primary obligation as you view it to the people you serve?
Well, first, I'd like to say that the Lord has blessed me in unusual ways, I think. And if you look, I don't have time to get into my background or whatever, but I was a stockbroker when I was 19. That just doesn't happen. That's the Lord at work. And so I was well prepared for this, and I give glory to the Lord for that. And I just had a knack for investing. It was something that was not anything I learned from my family. It came out of the blue. It was the Lord, kind of guiding me in that step. And it's kind of like in the movie Chariots of Fire, where the star says, when I run, I feel his pleasure. I have the same feeling when I invest. I feel the Lord's pleasure, right? So I want to give him all the glory for how he set me up for this, and then really provided my career arc. As I mentioned, it was at Templeton, kind of the leading international investment firm in the world, one of the biggest mutual fund companies out there before it was acquired by Franklin, and just a tremendous blessing. So the Lord set me up really, really well to do this. And our theme is that we're committed to excellence in biblically responsible investing. That doesn't mean, you notice you say committed, it doesn't mean we're going to attain it. We are trying our hardest, obviously. We're working our best to achieve excellence in biblically responsible investing. I think it's not too hard to get the biblically responsible investing part excellent. We feel like we have the best research in that regard. It's obviously a lot more harder to get the investment performance part right in the crazy world that we live in. And so that's why we say we're committed. We're not going to guarantee that, but we do our best to generate good results for our clients.
And Rusty, that's perfect, because the standard, which you've identified, which I'm glad, is a biblical standard, biblically responsible investing. That's the direction you go, obligation to God. Ladies and gentlemen, the Scripture talks about finances a lot, and stewardship. That's why we're spending time here today, and Rusty Leonard is my guest with me through the balance of the program. When we come back, we're going to take an overall view broadly of the economy in the United States. We're going to start walking down through how we perceive what's happening. Expressing gratefulness is not only essential for God's blessing, it's God's antidote to pride. So can I invite you to be grateful with us? In just 10 years, God's grown APN from a mere vision to now reaching millions every day with God's Word and a biblical worldview. We're so grateful. We're also thankful for you who've partnered in prayer or finances along the way. Now, can I ask you to be grateful to God? Bless us and others by writing a note sharing how God's used Stand in the Gap radio and TV in your life. Share your thankfulness online, or simply send a letter like Mary did from Ohio. She said, "Your combining of biblical truth with the news of the day's done more to keep me and my family informed and prepared than any source of news I've ever found. Thank you, thank you." So just like Mary, will you share your thanks with us? Gratefulness is contagious, brings God's blessing, and encourages others. Thank God with us. Send a letter or go to standinthegapmedia.org.
Does your child struggle to learn in a traditional classroom setting? Do you find yourself wishing you could spend more time interacting with and training them in the ways of the Lord? Thousands of parents feel the same way, and that's why they've chosen to educate their children at home. This gives them the tremendous opportunity to not only ensure a biblical worldview education, but to instill Christian values and build stronger relationships along the way. If this sounds like something you're looking for, why not consider BJU Press Homeschool Resources? BJU Press offers a variety of programs tailored to meet your family's needs and accommodate your child's learning style. Their curriculum was created to challenge your child to think biblically and grow in godly wisdom while receiving an academically sound education. They offer traditional homeschool textbooks, online classroom, and distance learning. Take charge of your child's future by using BJU Press materials. Learn more at bjupress.com. That's bjupress.com.
David chose to stand for God against a giant, and he changed our world forever. Would you like to do the same today? Hello, I'm Sam Rohrer with another Stand in the Gap Minute. This week we've discussed what Scripture teaches about our choices and their consequences. When we choose the Lord and His ways, we receive a blessing. When we do not, we endure judgment. The life of David also shows the legacy of our godly choices and what they can leave. While God's people refused to oppose Goliath in his rage against the Lord, David chose to confront evil by the power of God. Despite his human limitations, his single stone provided victory over a more powerful opponent. No matter the situation you face today, trust in the Lord's power to strengthen you. Remember, it's not the size of your problem that matters. It's the size of your God that makes the difference. Discover more at AmericanPastorsNetwork.net.
What is a woman? This is Ken Ham, a publisher of the award-winning family magazine called Answers. Who would have thought even 10 years ago people would be asking, what is a woman? But, well, here we are. Last year, one dictionary added this to the definition of woman: an adult who identifies as a female. In other words, there's no such thing as a man or a woman. They're meaningless terms. But we can cut through the confusion of our culture with the truth and simplicity of God's Word. So God created man in His own image, male and female, He created them. Men are males and women are females. It's simple. Even a child can easily tell the difference. The confusion only comes from our culture. Let's get back to God's Word.
We always should want to go back to the Bible. Discover how to think biblically starting from that foundation when you visit AnswersRadio.com. That's AnswersRadio.com.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today. For more information, visit our website at standinthegapradio.com.
Well, welcome back to Stand in the Gap today. And this Friday program, we're devoting to the broader area of economics and finance, biblical stewardship. All these things, they really do fit together. My special guest, first-time guest here on Stand in the Gap today is Leonard. He is the founder and the CEO of Stewardship Partners Investment Counsel, writes a publication where he talks about the economy and that kind of thing, and we just got to meet him just a few minutes ago. We're going to talk about the economy now, and I'm going to be asking Rusty his perception and his reasons. We'll talk about that because how one views the economy, how one views his own life, how one views the world can come from all different directions. We know that. Now, here's an example. I'm going to walk into it. But in fulfillment of Article 2, Section 3, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. President is required, as an example, to give a joint session of Congress a State of the Union update. We're quite familiar with those, right? A portion of that address, almost always, impossible not to, involves a review of the state of the economy. In reality, however, I can tell you, you know as well as I do, these addresses for a long time to Congress provide very little honesty and very little of any serious economic review. it is, as we know, far more, I'm going to say, a carefully staged political posturing bragamony opportunity designed to tell the people what the party in power wants the people to think and perhaps head off controversies or perhaps, depending, too, I've seen this, instill fears in people. But the state of the economy is one of those things that does touch us all. It is important to all of us, every one of us, yet we seldom hear the truth. So the average citizen's sense of the state of the economy is more accurately felt in what they see with their jobs, the price of food that they may buy, and wondering all along this dichotomy of how in the world Congress can be spending trillions and trillions of dollars and going into debt by the trillions, and nothing seems to happen to them. But when they look at their own budgets, our own budgets, we know that ultimately debt will strangle you, and the consequence of personal debt will ultimately prevail and spares no one. So that's just a foundational thing. Rusty, I want to give you an open-ended question here right now to start off on this broader area, and that would be from this. From an overall perspective of the U.S. economy, how would you grade it? There's a number of ways. I could say on a scale of 1 to 10, but I'm going to do it this way. Excellent, good, satisfactory, sick, dying. So excellent to dying, good, satisfactory, and sick in the middle. How would you define overall the state of our economy?
Maybe I would say all the above.
Now that's a political answer, Rusty. Go ahead.
I'll break it down for you.
All right.
So on a very short-term basis, the economic level of economic activity in the U.S. is remarkably good. The Atlanta Fed has something where they try to track GDP in the current quarter. They have our economic growth at almost 6% this quarter, which is insane, right? Certainly, I don't think any of your listeners or viewers would look around themselves and feel like the economy is booming, but that is what the numbers are showing. And sometimes we have to wonder if they're getting a little bit like China here, and can we really believe these numbers? But for the moment, in the very, very short term, the actual economic circumstances are pretty good. Now, I always like to remind people that the Lord can pull the rug out from under us economically at any time. There are just multiple ways that could happen. And we surely, with the moral decline that we've seen, just can't believe what we've seen over the course of the last couple of decades. We seem to have reached a spot where I certainly wouldn't blame the Lord for pulling the rug out from under us. But we live in the greatest economically strong country in the history of the world, and by a large measure. And we're actually improving upon that right now because a lot of the other countries in the world are suffering. And I'm sure we'll talk about those shortly. But on the longer term basis, I would say we're in the sick and dying category, right? And that's because the root of any strong country or economy has got to be on the moral fiber of that country. And we're seeing that just fall apart, fall to pieces in so many different ways, debt being, the national debt being one of those things, but just in so many other ways as well. So it's a difficult time.
Okay, that's a good answer, Rusty. I didn't know what you were going to say. But okay, let's go there. Now let's go to this issue because U.S. debt, you mentioned it. I'm going to give some numbers here. Maybe our listeners are aware of this, maybe they're not. But U.S. debt right now is about $33 trillion, and it is climbing fast. The U.S. holds debt greater than any nation in the history of the world. And if one looks at it this way, the American people, if one takes and divides the total debt of, say, I'm going to just use the number 35 trillion by 300 million Americans, there's a few more than that, but just that round number, the debt owed by every man, woman, and child in the United States is over $110,000, and some would say it's more than that. So it's a big debt. That's what we owe. That means that on one hand, while we may be the rich in some respects, we are also the poorest of all people around the world if you look at that debt. So here it is. As a driver in the condition of the U.S. economy, and I know you maybe go that debt is ultimately related to moral actions, and I think there is. You may want to bring it out. But nonetheless, debt of this magnitude, larger than ever, all of us a piece of it. What do you say about the impact of this extraordinary debt on our economy, present, future?
Yeah, obviously, fundamentally, all of us, individually and as a country, would prefer if we had no debt, right? You're in a better spot if you owe no money to anyone. And the Bible's pretty clear about that anyway. But we do have this debt, and it's growing like a weed. And it's both political parties have participated in the massive expansion of debt because, I'm sure, Sam, over the course of your political career and your entire business career and everything else, you've always heard, hey, we've got to cut this debt. We have to stop it. It's getting out of hand. And it's just gotten more and more out of hand. And the reason why is because it hasn't hurt us any. So the politicians are in this mindset that they can just spend, despite all the concerns that are raised by sensible people, it's like, well, we've never seen any problem. So there was a theory offered recently called modern monetary theory, which just said you can spend whatever amount of money you want as a government. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. And then they tried that with COVID, and we got very sizable inflation. So it does matter, and it's a real problem. I go 100 different ways with this, but I wouldn't want people to get overly concerned. We should be quite concerned, but I don't know if we should be overly concerned. For instance, we never talk about we talk about the national debt, but we never talk about the other side of the balance sheet, which is the national wealth. And the United States has tremendous wealth. For instance, if you took just the wealth of the top 1% of the company, and you just said, we're stealing it from you, which obviously I wouldn't endorse, but if we just, for argument's sake, if we said we're going to steal the wealth of the top 1%, we would be able to almost pay off the entire national debt as it stands right now. So we have a tremendous amount of wealth in this country, which you have to, when you look at the total balance sheet, you have to consider that as well. And that's one of the reasons why the dollar has been so strong recently and why the economy is doing well. We can actually handle a lot of debt, but we're on a trajectory where we're going to blow ourselves up. And that may come at us much faster than you think. There's some famous author, I forget who it was, who said, somebody asked him, he went bankrupt, and they said, how did you go bankrupt? He goes, first it was very slow. Then all at once it happened. Something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing, and we run the risk of finding ourselves in that fast decline period if we don't start taking action soon. And I don't see that happening actually at the moment.
And Rusty, I think you made a good comment because I would agree with you. There is a sense that we are invincible. That is a prideful concept. There's another one that's developed, and you said it. Well, we've been raising these fears all along. You just can't keep spending. You just can't keep spending, and yet we keep on spending, and we haven't fallen apart. Therefore, that idea of you can't keep spending must not be right, so therefore, let's just open up the gates and just spend all we want, which is what's happening. But the biblical principle of debt, though, and I just want to ask you this, the biblical principle of debt is a very clear one, and are there any exceptions?
What you have to look at is the fact that all countries have debt. Some countries have much more debt than we have, and they're still functioning. So while it's not a good place to be, I said that right at the outset. We'd all prefer to have zero debt, right? But somehow, because you can get away with it, and because there's politics, and there's short-term benefits to politicians from spending like crazy. The reason why we're growing almost 6% is because Joe Biden is run the deficit up massively again, even in a period of time when the economy was doing okay. You only run the deficit up when you're in a depression, or a COVID-type crisis. He's running it up when the economy is doing okay. There's going to be a bad outcome to that. But anyway, the debt situation, we would prefer to have none. Everybody would prefer to have none. We'd all be better off, and we'd be living within our means and making more sensible decisions and putting ourselves at less risk. So the Bible, of course, is always right. But that doesn't mean that the penalty for that debt is instantaneous.
Okay, all right, that's a good answer as well. Ladies and gentlemen, debt is not something that is it can be your friend if you use it properly, but we'll touch more on that in the next segment. But we're going to talk in the next segment about other things that are happening of which you may be hearing. There's a BRICS nation meeting that's been taking place. There is the factors with banks failing. Our own nation's credit rating was just downgraded in the last few days. Okay, what does that mean? We'll look at some of those things in the next segment.
On Stand in the Gap today, frequent guest, constitutional attorney David New, had this to say about the American Pastors Network and our media ministry.
The Ministry of American Pastors Network is very, very unique. All the host members that run the show are very devout men of God. They have all kinds of guests from different backgrounds on all kinds of subjects, but they all basically boil down to one thing. We're in the business of honoring Jesus Christ. This is a program that is worthy of your prayer support. It is worthy of your financial support. You will be blessed, and those who listen to this program will be blessed.
Thanks, David. We certainly agree. And it's why we're inviting you to tune in to Stand in the Gap today. To learn more and see the many resources we offer, visit our website at standinthegapmedia.org. That's standinthegapmedia.org.
Here's Twyla Braze with today's Health Freedom Minute.
The Biden administration will soon impose price controls on medication in Medicare. Price controls lead to shortages. The so-called Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 gives the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services the authority to negotiate prescription drug prices for Medicare recipients. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has filed a motion to dismiss one of 6 lawsuits on this issue. It says the law violates the First, Fifth, and Eighth Amendments of the Constitution and would inflict irreparable harm on U.S. businesses and patients. While the Chamber is correct, government price negotiation will hurt patients, the Chamber has long involved itself in crony capitalism rather than pushing for free markets and an end to government controls over all medical decisions.
Help us secure health freedom for all. Visit cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
What is God doing in America? Is the experiment that began in Philadelphia nearly 250 years ago over for good? Or is there a pathway back? Can we rekindle ideals that freed millions from human bondage? Is there still a purpose for a nation that defended liberty in nearly every corner of the globe and once deployed a worldwide Christian missionary movement? We at Stand in the Gap Radio believe the answer is yes. By God's grace, America's story is far from over. And it's why we launched 11 Principles for National Renewal, a TV series and compatible journey guide to help you, your family, or your small group take the first steps in helping America begin again. Learn more at standinthegapmedia.org or search for 11 Principles for National Renewal at Amazon.com. Because America's spiritual renewal begins with you.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today, discussing the pressing issues facing our culture from a biblical and constitutional perspective. Now let's rejoin our host.
Well, if you're just joining us today, our focus, economics, finance, biblical stewardship, weaving some of those things through. My title today is this: the U.S. economy in light of debt, dollar, banks, and credit ratings. And we're going to talk about some more of those things in the next segment. My special guest is Rusty Leonard. He's the founder and CEO of Stewardship Partners Investment Counsel. They have a website at stewardshippartners.com. Stewardshippartners.com. Okay. Talked about debt in the last segment. We have a lot of it. With the overshadowing of national debt, it's about $33 trillion right now. It is on track and expected by 2030. It'll be approaching $50 trillion. It's out of control. Personal credit card debt stands right now today at $1.3 trillion. Student debt stands right now at $1.8 trillion. We are a nation, you could put it this way, of indentured servants. A lot of people owe somebody a lot of money. All right, now that being the case, our government also is not only borrowed from the American people, we have borrowed from other countries. We are indebted to other countries. China. And a mother a lot. So there's an aspect of that. Whoever you borrow from exercise a certain control over you. Now, our total U.S. tax revenue, these numbers are current as of today. U.S. tax revenue stands right now at $4.6 trillion, but it lags our spending, federal government, this is not state, federal government, at $6.3 trillion. So we're short $1.7 trillion automatically, immediately. Every dollar we spent, we're going to debt. Now, suffice to say that these factors, among others, are driving stakes into our economic health. They have to, and have in part, resulted in the downgrading of U.S. credit worthiness, our status. Fitch, Moody's, and I think some others have downgraded the credit rating of the United States in the last days. The Federal Reserve is moving towards, as we know, a digital currency. Congress has taken the lid off of spending. They literally have taken the lid off of spending. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, formed some years ago, meeting the last few days, and their goal, replace the U.S. dollar. And 30 African nations in the last couple of weeks, 30 African nations, they recently met and they dumped the U.S. dollar in favor of some BRICS currency, which is still being worked out. So some key economists that I respect have said that we're witnessing actually what one could only view to be a controlled demolition of our banking system and our economy, because simply, as some would say, these folks at the top just can't be that stupid. And ignorance is pretty deep, Rusty. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of things that we just talked about that people think, well, you know what? We're different. Nothing's happened yet, so therefore, go ahead and spend. But let's talk about this right now. Credit ratings are important individually. They're important for companies. So what does it mean to you relative to our economic health? How do we interpret the recent downgradings of U.S. government credit rating?
I think they were entirely appropriate. I think it was only Fitch who's done it so far. S&P had done it some years back, and then I think they went back to AAA. Obviously, it was just a small downgrade. You're still AA+. It's not going to change much of anything. I don't think it will affect interest rates for the U.S. government or anything like that. However, it was they could have gone more, and all of them should be downgrading the U.S. at this stage of the game for precisely the reasons we've been talking about, this unhinged spending without any regard. And, we've been talking in this country a lot about the lack of accountability. Well, Congress certainly, and the presidents, but not just the current president, all earlier presidents too, have not had any accountability on this. And that's the voters. In the end, you have to look at the voters, because the voters vote these people in, and if they're not paying sufficient attention, or we only have ourselves to look at for this, because we're the ones who are electing these people who are continuing this controlled demolition, as you called it. So it's not a good thing. I think it should be downgraded more just to put a scare, to provide that accountability. What we need is for the financial markets to actually kind of crash and burn a little bit, so that they realize that they can't do this without some pain being inflicted, and then also losing their jobs, as they would likely get thrown out of office if that was the case. So I think we, to a certain extent, sensible people maybe should be rooting for a little bit of a smackdown in the financial markets, because that would finally wake these people up and say you can't really continue to proceed down this path without any kind of consequences. Okay,
Rusty, let me jump in. A perfect opportunity to ask you this question. Many, many, many people hear about, we're going to have a hard landing, equal depression. We're going to have a soft landing, as in not much impact, but a correction of some type. That's what you're talking about. People hear those words, don't always know what that means. But you are suggesting, what I heard you just say, that there needs to be a wake-up call, which I agree, which does mean some kind of a correction. All right, let me just ask you this question. How much pain needs to be felt? Because right now, most people in a position of authority are not following good common sense. So how much of a wake-up call is needed for people to actually wake up?
Well, I think it would have to be pretty significant. So last year, the markets were off by 20%. It didn't change a thing. So we had in the 2008 bubble collapse, the real estate bubble collapse, markets declined about 50%, globally. And we had the same factor in the internet bubble and that. So, I would think we need a 40 to 50% decline in the stock market. And also, seeing, well, you probably would see bonds doing better in that scenario. But you need to have a really serious smackdown, certainly 35% at least, to kind of grab the attention of the leadership and make them realize that they can't keep doing this. They have to take corrective action. They have to take it fast.
Okay,
I think we're going to get that. I don't see how that's avoidable, really.
Okay, well, let me ask you this.
Time.
Okay, let me ask you this question right now. Sometimes, as you said appropriately, how does one go into bankruptcy? Well, it's a little bit of a time, and a little bit of a bit at a time, and then all of a sudden, bang, you're falling off the cliff. All right. In the case of a correction, the Federal Reserve has been raising it. They've lowered interest rates for a long time. They've raised interest rates, trying to control inflation that they say is like. They've tried through what's called monetary policy to try to tinker with and all of that kind of thing. All right, here's my question to you. Do they have the ability? Does the Federal Reserve have the ability to actually make a change? Or are we at a point where other factors, if they are, what are they, that will make this correction? In other words, can you control it, or is it just going to happen?
Yeah, I would say it's a little more likely just going to happen. So right now, what you're seeing around the world is kind of the collapse in China is becoming kind of unhinged. It's uncontrolled at this stage of the game, or starting to look like that. I shouldn't say it's there yet, but it's starting to look like it's out of control. And up to this point in time, as they've, and you talk about debt problem, China's got a massive debt problem, much larger than ours. And they've blown their economy up through the real estate sector. They have 50 million apartments that nobody lives in. The whole financing scheme behind that is starting to collapse. It could be an incredibly bad situation in China, and as that portion of their economy, which accounts for a good third, the real estate sector accounts for roughly a third of their economy, as that goes through a nasty collapse, it's going to have waves of impacts across the rest of the globe, primarily deflation. So it's very likely that we'll see something like that happen. They'll be able to slow it down. They'll do everything they can, as they have for more than a decade, trying to push this off. But eventually, you can only push a growing boulder uphill for so long before it rolls back over top of you. And I think China's at that point. And it will have an impact on a lot of things, but I think particularly on the inflation rate. We may be back in deflation, which would indicate that bonds are probably the place you want to have more of an investment. And as it turns out, bonds are cheaper, much cheaper than stocks right now. So I'm getting ahead of us here. We'll talk more about that later. But
Okay, we've got about a minute left. Let me just ask you this question. The BRICS nations are talking about an alternative to the dollar that's linked to some kind of a commodity, gold or minerals or something. Is it really possible that a currency can retain legitimacy and strength if it's not linked to something? The U.S. dollar used to be linked to gold. We know it's not. There was a link to OPEC oil for a while. That's not. So explain that. Linking of currency, money to a commodity of some type. Necessary or not necessary?
The dollar is worth $1 because we all believe it's worth $1. It's a full faith and credit of the United States. It's just because we believe it. It's a mirage, right? So it isn't tied to anything, as you say. But the fact remains that the United States is this massive juggernaut of an economic system. The freedom that we've had, the creativity, it's all generated this unbelievable economic growth over many, many years, so that we are just blowing everybody else out of the water. In fact, right now our economic growth is stronger than that in China. So it's just unbelievable. It's really the best system that was ever invented. And but as you said, it seems like some are involved in a controlled demolition process, trying to figure out how to make sure that we can't continue on that path with great success. So that's disconcerting. But let me just comment too, real quickly, on the BRICS situation.
All right, we're about out of time, Rusty. Hold that if you don't mind. When we come back in the next segment, let's start with that, and then we'll go on to, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to ask Rusty, in light of these things, okay, what should we do to the extent that we're able to manage, control our finances, our savings? What can we do in light of these things? We'll deal with both of those when we come back in the next segment.
From the time our children are born until the moment they leave our homes as young adults, Christian parents are given the privilege and responsibility of guiding them into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. All during their growing years, they're influenced by the people and events around them. Sometimes these are out of our control, but many times we can make choices as to how they'll be educated, what church they'll attend, and the overall atmosphere of our home. If you've decided your child is best influenced by a biblical worldview education, you'll want to consider BJU Press homeschool materials. Dedicated to academic excellence, BJU Press offers a curriculum that not only assists you to pass along your values to your children, but makes it easy and affordable. The decisions made in response to the challenges and opportunities your child will face in life are largely determined by their internal spiritual compass. Is your child ready for the journey? Find out more at bjupress.com. That's bjupress.com.
For years, faithful Christians formed nonprofit foundations or trusts to preserve their ability to generously give to their favorite causes or ministries, even after their death. The problem? Professional managers, pressure from left-wing agendas, and even family members with opposing views hijacked the original donor intent. This is sad but true. But this subversion of purpose can be prevented. Hello, I'm Sam Rohr of the American Pastors Network, and I'm glad to recommend Capstone Legacy Foundation in Wayne, Pennsylvania, an experienced and capable Christian community foundation. Established to help you set up a ministry, a giving structure guaranteed not to be hijacked, or a place you can donate cash or non-cash assets like stocks, bonds, or property. Capstone's designed to help you achieve immediate tax savings and give you needed time to decide how to prayerfully allocate your giving. Contact Capstone at 610-688-8890 or visit them at capstonelegacy.org.
I'm Ruth Kramer with Mission Network News. The Russia-Ukraine war is creating a new crisis for Christian refugees in Turkey. Transform Iran's Lana Silk says people fleeing from Russia and Ukraine can purchase housing with cash. Now that incentivizes landlords to double the rent that believers pay. Deportation poses another major threat. Transform Iran provides legal support to stop Christian refugees from being sent back into Iran. Pray the Lord would block efforts to deport Iranian Christian refugees. And Lebanon narrowly avoided a gray list of countries under scrutiny by the Financial Action Task Force. Countries are listed for potential money laundering and financing terrorism. Meanwhile, Tom Adamo with Heart for Lebanon says leaders blame Syrian refugees for the country's crises. Lebanon hosts roughly 1.5 million Syrian refugees. Heart for Lebanon says a new generation of Christian leaders can provide gospel hope. Find your place in the story at missionnews.org. Mission Network News is a service of One Way Ministries. I'm Ruth Kramer.
With a 1 minute look at culture from a Christian worldview, I'm John Stonestreet with The Point. According to the Daily Mail, the Biden administration's health secretary recently endorsed a gender clinic in Alaska. The secretary is a man who identifies as a woman. The clinic advocates for replacing the term mother with, and I quote, egg producer. Somehow Happy Egg Producer Day doesn't have quite the same ring to it as Mother's Day. As a colleague of mine noted when she heard that story, this really is the Handmaid's Tale. Look, language matters, especially from the people who occupy positions of cultural power. From the media, who call this he a she, to the politicians who claim he is a powerful woman, to a clinic that's just obscuring reality. When leaders detach from reality, incoherent and dangerous ideas like this are the result. Reality, however, has hard edges, and neither our bad ideas nor our bad language actually change reality. The further afield from reason and science our cultural elites wander, the more revolutionary it'll be to just say what's true. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet.
You're listening to Stand in the Gap today. For more information, visit our website at standinthegapradio.com.
Well, as we go into the final segment, Rusty, let me go back to you. You were going to give some additional comments on the actions of the BRICS nations called Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Go ahead and complete your thought there, if you would, please.
Yeah, so they're attempting to undermine the U.S. and they're trying to start a new currency, and this is all in an effort to undermine the U.S. totally, but also to keep them, give them an escape route from the sanctions that the U.S. can impose on these countries. It's a joke. They don't have a chance anytime soon. Maybe 20 years from now they'll have some success. But the U.S. economy is such a huge entity throughout the world that these little countries, Argentina just joined them, Egypt just joined them, Iran just joined them, and the dollar is crushing all these other currencies currently. So Russia's currency is diving, China's currency is diving, it's having to be supported by state support. This is not going to have any short-term impact on the value and the strength of the U.S. dollar. So when you hear these things, put it in the back of your mind, because it does have some long-term implications that if they are successful, 10 or 20 years to now to build this thing up, they might be able to undermine the strength of the dollar and the use of it as the reserve currency. But I also like to remind people that England used to have the reserve currency of the world. They lost that status to us, and they're still doing just fine. So don't get too concerned about that whole reserve dollar argument.
Okay, all right, Rusty, I'm going to let it hang right there, and ask you to go in just because I want to make sure we have time here, and that is this in personal application for people, because they are wondering. All right, now you've described a number of things. They may perceive it the same way. They may not perceive it the same way, and that is what everyone must come to their own judgment based on the facts. But there's one thing that doesn't change. Believers are obligated and going to give an account to God for the way we deal with our finances. Stewardship is a biblical principle. The question of how we best steward, though, what God's given in these days and in light of the things that we're talking about now, it does become a logical question. So I go to you in this and say, how should or what should the God-fearing person be thinking and doing right now in light of their own finances and compliance with biblical stewardship in light of these things that we've talked about?
Well, Sam, as you know, because you've seen my market updates, I have a scripture at the top of that, and it's from 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And so we're trying our best to not be too fearful, although, gosh, the stuff that's going on around us certainly does cause us to be fearful. And to have a sound mind. And, there's not a lot of sound thinking going on in our country and in not just our country, in the whole world. So we try to do that and try to, seek the Lord's help for guidance in those things. But part of the problem that we see is that sound thinking right now is so out of style that if you are using sound thinking and yet the markets are responding to just goofball thinking, you can look foolish for a while.
Okay,
right?
okay, Rusty, I'm going to interject and clarify, define that. Sound thinking to you may not be the same thing as sound thinking to somebody. What do you mean by sound thinking?
Well, obviously, a man is a man, a woman's a woman.
Okay.
Various things along those lines, as well as debt is, you don't want too much debt. Sound thinking is just kind of common sense. It's just common sense. And so, obviously, there's a lot of folks in this world right now that are just, really just shaking their fist at the things God has created for us in terms of gender and marriage and other things. And there's, it's hard to believe the Lord will allow that to go on for too long without some kind of practical effort to, wake people up. So anyway, from how to invest right now, you want to think soundly. You don't want to join up with the Looney Tunes who are out there, speculating on all kinds of weird stuff and thinking debt is great. So you need to be cautious. And so our clients are invested in a hedged manner so that if the markets go down, they won't lose, all their assets. We are, we're value oriented, not growth oriented, because growth is overpriced. We have a lot of money in the fixed income, and in particular the short-term fixed income markets, because we think interest rates might have to go higher yet to quell this market, this economy down in the U.S. at least. And so, and we're just being very cautious. That we're in a very cautious mode at the moment. We're looking for what we call the point of maximum pessimism, which is something that my mentor John Templeton coined, a term that he coined, and that's the best time to buy financial assets when everybody else is panicking and selling them. The point of maximum pessimism. We're not there yet, and we got a long ways to go to get there. But I was feeling that as we talk in the future, Sam, we'll have passed one of those points of maximum pessimisms in the financial markets at some point.
Okay, all right, that's excellent. Debt. We talked about debt. One thing I've said very, very clearly on this program many times before, is that if a person is in debt, which most are, do your best to get out of debt, as that will provide freedom. Speak to that issue of debt load that people have.
Yeah, well, like you said, we mentioned it before. All other things being equal, everyone would prefer to have no debt, right? You have much more freedom. You're not constrained. If you feel like the Lord's calling you to do X, Y, or Z, you don't have financial constraints preventing you from doing that. So I think that's one of the best reasons for an individual to be out of debt, to make sure that they don't have any constraints that would prevent them from doing what they feel the Lord is calling them to do. So yeah, we definitely encourage that. And there's other ways. Debt can be used, as you mentioned earlier, in a sensible fashion, but you always want to make sure you have liquid assets to offset it. If you can set yourself up as a bank where you can borrow money cheaply and lend it out more expensively and make the difference, and you have some kind of understanding of how all that process works, well, then maybe debt's not the end of the world, because you're making money off of the whole situation. But generally speaking, you want to be a lender and not a borrower.
Okay. All right. That's a general principle. So, ladies and gentlemen, I can say, I think all of you who listen to me right now, if you paid off your house a long time ago, as an example, your mortgage, you know how much freedom and flexibility that's given you to give to other people, to do a whole lot of things. Debt of any type is a constraint. So that is one. Rusty, just curious of your perspective on that. Many financial advisors and others would say, all right, every person ought to also have a certain amount of living expenses at home, because some banks do close down. We've run into those circumstances. What do you say about having a certain amount of cash available at home, as an example? What's your thought?
Yeah, obviously, yes. I think that it's sensible to have that. It's unlikely that you'll need it. So you don't want to go hog wild, putting too much money aside. And of course, there's risk by having cash at home, right? Your home could burn down, your home could be broken into various things. So you want to keep some kind of common sense around that as well. But yeah, it makes total sense, and especially in the world we live in now, which is so controlled by the internet, and who knows what tools our enemies have that they could shut the whole thing down, and all of a sudden you want to go to the bank, or you want to use your credit card, or you can't do any of that, right? So, we're worried about the central bank digital currency, but we really kind of have something like that anyway, where how many of us use cash now for just about anything? And some places are no longer even taking cash. So, yeah, it's we could be controlled very easily. Some Christian ministries are finding themselves losing access to the bank because they're a Christian ministry, and they don't, the bank doesn't agree with them, with their views on things. So yeah, you need to have some kind of backup. My goal would be to have a complete Christian financial system set up, kind of outside the normal financial system, but that's very hard to do.
Well, that's hard to do, and that may be a topic for another program. Rusty, we've covered a lot of issues today. We'll bury that. We'll go down into more of those in the future, the Lord willing. Thanks for being with me today. Again, Rusty's website, stewardshippartners.com. You can find out more information about what he said and about him. Well, thank you all for watching us today and listening to us on radio, and we trust that we'll see you on Monday.
If you liked today's program, tell a friend. You'll also want to hear Stand in the Gap Weekend and watch the nationally syndicated Stand in the Gap TV program. We present the news of the day truthfully, carefully, and consistently from a biblical worldview and constitutional perspective. If you're hungry for the truth, visit standinthegapmedia.org to find all our programs and the stations that carry them. While you're there, be sure to download our free app and support this ministry with your best financial gift. Then join us again right here Monday through Friday for another program of Stand in the Gap Today.